night several years ago, and he has such an inspirational story and has a huge heart for um, H&I work and is a got a huge heart for AA. And I just really love the man. I respect him a great deal. And I won't take up any more time. Harold, I really appreciate you coming out tonight, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Harold Long. I'm an alcoholic. I'm here in the big state of Missouri, in the town of Hillsboro, just outside of St. Louis, about 30 minutes out of here. I just moved back here at the end of June from Branson, Missouri, but I've been in Missouri all my sobriety. And so I come to you from there. My home group's in St. Louis. It's called AA on the Rocks, and we meet on Wednesday nights, and we're primarily a Zoom meeting at this point in time. My sponsor, most of my sobriety, was Tom I from North Carolina, and my sponsee brother Roy's on here, and so we have a lot in common and know each other well. And so I come from a great line of sponsorship. Unfortunately, Tom's been in a position health-wise not to be able to sponsor for a number of years now. So he'll still be my sponsor till he goes to the big meeting in the sky. But he's 63 years sober and coming up on a birthday soon, and made a huge difference in my life. My sponsor today, Steve L. out of Nashville, he kind of was willing to pick up that covenant relationship that I had with Tom, and I've been walking that with Steve ever since. So that's just a little background of where I am today and how I got where I'm at. And so it's made a huge difference in my life, is what I'm telling you, sponsorship. Talking about this subject of emotional sobriety, I think back in my life, I came to AA for the first time in 1979 through the Department of Corrections. That's where I was introduced to AA in the Dare County Detention Center. And then I was in my first treatment center in 1980, which was part of a plea bargain deal, which was either do 30 days in the treatment center or go back and do it two and a half more years in Boonville Correctional Center. And I had quit school when I was 13, but I sure knew that 30 days was a heck of a lot shorter than 2.5 years. So I was introduced to AA on the outside in 1980. And I went there and was far from conceding that I was powerless over alcohol. Wasn't anything close on my radar, and I continued to drink. My bottom with alcohol came 1987. I had acquired a 4 DWI conviction, and a few weeks later, I was involved in a drunk driving accident. I wasn't driving, but I was a passenger in the car, and coming home from a rock and roll gig. I was a drummer most of my life, and over in East St. Louis, Illinois, coming home late at night, and I'm in the back seat of a car with 4 other band members in the car, and I'm in the back seat on the passenger side, and we get hit with a spotlight on the highway and pulls us over on the shore of the road, and we sit there for a while, and we thought it was law enforcement. Eventually the spotlight goes out, and it was just a truck full of guys with the spotlight on their truck, being silly, playing games, and they were intoxicated as well. And so it ended up being a high-speed chase coming back towards St. Louis, and they swerved at us, we'd swerve at them. And unfortunately, before this whole tragedy was over, they swerved that truck just a little bit too hard, and it shot it over the embankment, and it flipped numerous times. And unfortunately, by the time it stopped, it destroyed the truck and killed everybody inside the vehicle. And so by the time we got home from that, early in the morning the next day, I was just a crushed soul. I mean, it was just like somebody took out my soul and just whacked it in half. And I was just a defeated guy. But as any time that I ran up against King Alcohol, and there was nothing between me and King Alcohol always won out. And so even after coming home from a fatality drunk driving accident, I'm still drinking that morning because that's just all I know how to do. And I'm behind the wheel of a car about a week later, and I got arrested for a 50 DWI conviction, which was felony DWIs for me and parole violation. And so I was 21 going on 22, in a lot of trouble. And it was in that jail cell, in a drunk tank, in my underwear, weighed about 140 pounds probably at the time, by myself, isolated in this cell, that I got on my knees and said the most honest prayer I've ever said in my life. And it was simply 3 words: God help me. And God honored that prayer, because from that moment to this day, almost 34 years later, I've never found it necessary to pick up a drink or do anything that's, to burn my life completely into the ground again. And I I checked myself back in that same treatment center I was in 1980, and that was about almost 200 miles from where I'm at. There was a lot of AA and treatment centers in St. Louis, but that wasn't where the seed was planted. It was planted almost 200 miles away, and so I went back there, and I went back there not to go to AA. I mean, going to AA was the furthest thing from my mind. I went there just because I wanted to complete something for the course, because I had a trial coming up, and I had nothing to fall back on my whole life. I grew up on the streets. I was raised by a mother who was married to a pretty severe alcoholic here in St. Louis, who had a son and two daughters out of that marriage. And somewhere right around between the age of 10 and 13, 14 with those kids, she just broke down and lost it, and she just left. And she was gone for a decade, and nobody knew where she was at, if she was alive, if she was dead. And my mother never ever really revealed a whole lot about those 10 years or ever talked about it. But the end result was is that she ended up in a state mental institution on the west side of the state in Nevada, Missouri, which is still active today in Nevada, right on the Kansas-Oklahoma border. And my mom was there for a good while before she was able either to convince them she was well enough to get out, or she was able to just get out because she got better. But regardless, she got out. And she met another alcoholic who happened to be my dad, and the game was on again. And I came out of that marriage between age 2 and 3. She ran him off, and it was just her and I growing up. My mom turned her will in life over to the care of God, as she understood God at that point in time in her life, which was through her Catholic roots and her Catholic faith. And she never wavered on that, and she never looked back. And she went on to live an amazing life. And she was the greatest winner in my life, I can promise you. But we didn't have any resources. She didn't have any education. Her parents died young. I never knew any of my grandparents. I barely knew my dad. Actually, the last time I ever saw my father was 14, and I was in this town that I'm in right now in Hillsboro, being sentenced for the first time to a juvenile penitentiary, and he came in for that trial and for that sentencing. That was the last time I ever saw my dad alive. But it was just her and I. And so she was, she gave me all the love a kid could want. She wanted me to have this idea about this power. So she got whatever resources she could, grants, whatever, and put me into a parochial school from kindergarten to the 4th grade, and wanted me to have this spiritual upbringing. And it probably made a huge difference in my life, no question about it. But at the age, right around age 8, somewhere right around there, she dropped the bomb on me and said, "Hey, we're going to move to St. Louis." And I said, "Why are we doing that?" And she said, "Because that is, you have a brother and 2 sisters you don't know about." And that just blew me away. I mean, that was just a story I never even knew existed. And it was her attempt to reconcile with those children. And so we moved back to a suburb of St. Louis, not far from where I'm at. And we moved into a beat-up old trailer park. And we lived in the back with the beat-up old trailers where everybody was referred to as trailer trash. And my mom, didn't have any education, and being a divorced woman twice, doesn't wear well with you in the 60s and into the 70s. And so she worked, minimum wage jobs, and usually had 2 or 3 of them. So by the time I was 10, I was just coming and going as I pleased. I did whatever I wanted to by that age. And I was a rock and roll drummer. I grew long hair, and, I was, was accepted in a lot of circles that I probably would have never been accepted in. And they weren't healthy circles. They were dark circles where street drugs and darkness was going on. And, my mom drank her whole life. My mother always had whatever beer was on sale in the refrigerator, and she always had a 5th of Old Crow underneath the sink. And I'm sure I had piddled with all that stuff. I know I drank altar wine, from, as a young Catholic kid more than once, but I don't count any of that as my first real drink in my life. My first real drink came in around age 11 because I hung out with older guys. Being a rock and roll drummer, I just did. I craved the experience, the strength, the hope that older people were able to give me. I didn't have a dad in my life. I didn't have any uncles. I didn't have a brother. Even the brother that I reconciled with, I never had much of a relationship with. He was much older than I was, and just a different world, different time. And so I grew up around some rowdy people. And as a result of that, growing up on the streets, suffered about all the abuse a kid could suffer before I was even 15 years old. I'm talking sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse. You go on down the line, emotional abuse. I had it all. I had the whole gamut. And I started drinking when I was 11, and really it took off from there, and it caused me a lot of problems. And because we didn't have the resources to be able to live that way, I started into a life of crime, and it didn't serve me well. And it started me in the Department of Corrections by the time I was 12, started in Boys Town and eventually Boonville. I quit school by the time I was 13. I left home for good when I was 15. I grew up on the streets. Um, and my life was just, a game of survival, really, until I crashed and burned and came to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I came to a really, really fractured person, just like we all do. Um, and I didn't plan on going to AA. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I had got 12 step by a gentleman while I was in a treatment center. His name was Gary, and he was only 2.5 months sober, but he was about 55. And so, he was a fatherly figure in a way. But he took an interest in me, and he invested in me, and he took me to some outside meetings, et cetera. But eventually I had to come home. And I didn't go to AA. It was the first thing from my mind to go to AA. All I was consumed with was this trial that I had coming up. And he was a persistent friend, and he kept calling me, and he said, Harold, have you went to AA? And I said, no, man, I haven't went to AA. He says, Harold, your life depends on that. And I knew that was a true statement. But I was just stuck in that place. I was at that jumping off point, as our literature would refer to. I couldn't picture life without alcohol being a part of it. I did it my whole life. And I couldn't picture my life if I continued down that dark path. I knew I would spend the rest of my life incarcerated, or I would die. And so nobody had to convince me that anymore. I was able to concede to that. But I was just terrified to make that change, terrified to step into another world, because that's what it was like. It was like I'm just going to move into a whole new world. And I was terrified to do that because I had no skills, and I was an emotional dwarf, as we're talking about now. I was just an emotional misfit. And so I was just fractured on every level. And I didn't go. And finally he talked me into getting on a bus. And I went and got on a bus. I got a bus pass and went to this meeting. And it was a 2:00 meeting on a Saturday. And it was this time, it was late spring. And I sat there on this bench watching people go into this hospital door. And I knew that it was the right room. I'd see people with their big books in their hand. But I couldn't get the courage to go in. And fear won out, and I got back on the bus and went home. But finally, through his persistence, and I'm forever grateful for him for being persistent, I was able to finally start my journey in AA and go to my first meeting. I came to AA the same way I did everything else in my life. And this is really at the root of what we're talking about. This narcissistic, extremely self-centered MO. I'm going to do what I want, when I want, the way I want, how I want. And if you don't like it, man, too bad. And I had planted that flag long before I ever picked up King Alcohol. That was just part of my MO, and as psychologists would tell us, and through a lot of science, that, by the time we're 4 or 5, we're already developed, we're already shaped. And I was already extremely self-centered. I could never articulate that or tell you what that was going on, but that was who I was, big time. And so I came to AA with that same chip on my shoulder, that same attitude, that screw you attitude had already cemented itself before I ever picked up my first drink. And so it didn't serve me well, is the point I'm making. And so I came to AA and I fell in love with the fellowship, but I definitely didn't want a sponsor in my life. I'd had a probation and parole officer since I was 10 years old. I wasn't interested in any of that. I mean, I just wasn't. I didn't need somebody telling me what to do, when to come. I had it my whole life. You weren't going to sell me on that. I was like, no, thanks. I'm just not going to do that. And I just hung around. I had a sober band called Alliance, and I, chased girls, and I went to played on sober softball teams, and I did all the fellowship stuff. But you can only live that life for so long. And it ultimately, the root of the problem, which is a lot of what we read tonight and what we're talking about, will rear its ugly head. And eventually you're going to come to the end of yourself. Hopefully you don't drink or take your life before you find the steps and you find the solution and you have this transformation in your life. And thank God I did, but I was really close. And so at 3 years of sobriety, I finally came to the end of myself. And I asked this guy to sponsor me. And this guy's name was Roy, and he knew me the whole time. And I went to his house and I sat with Roy, and I asked, and it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. It was like asking somebody out on a date, really. I mean, it was that big a deal to the girl you've always wanted to ask out. It was that big a moment for me to ask somebody to sponsor me. And I went to his house, and he said, well, Harold, I've watched you for almost 3 years now. Tell me where you're at. Tell me what's going on in your life right now. Tell me about it. I said, I'll tell you about my life. Roy, I said, I'm 25 years old. I live in the basement of a house. I don't have any education. I don't even have a GED. I got a criminal record. I don't have a license. I never had a legal driver's license, and I don't know that I'll ever get a legal driver's license. I got a piece of crap car that's held together by A bumper stickers. My life sucks every which way you can take it. Take the word sucks, put it in all cap letters, highlight it, bold it, put Christmas lights around it, and flash it. Sucks, sucks, sucks. That's where my life was at, and I hadn't drank in 3 years. And Roy graciously listened to all that, and he's got a reputation still today of being a little bit gruff on that kind of stuff. But that day he was really gentle with me, and I shared with him. And when I got done, what he said to me changed my life. And he said, Harold, fate chooses our upbringing. Fate chooses our parents. And there's no doubt about it that you've been dealt a tough hand in life. I mean, no question about it. And I feel for you. But that said, I hope you're going to hear what I'm going to tell you. Because everything and this would call me a young man, but he said, everything you have in your life, young man, sitting here at my kitchen table on this day, you've attracted to you because of the person that you become. And the day you're man enough to own that is the day you're on your way to some real change. But until you can own that, this little vicious cycle you're on, you're eventually going to drink again because you're not happy about your sobriety. Or you're going to do what my dad did. My dad was a drunk his whole life and unfortunately took his life because he couldn't stop drinking. The pain got too great. And he just took his life. So you'll either drink again or you're going to do what your dad did. But you can't, this la la land that you're floating in the game is up. So you're going to do one or two things. You're either going to grow or you're going to go. And the $1 million question is, what do you want to do? And I didn't want to go. That's for sure. And I knew he was going to say, let's work the steps. And friends, the reality was I didn't think the 12 steps would change my life. Why? Because of this broken, fractured, individualistic, consumeristic, narcissistic mindset of a person that I was. This very self-reliant worldview that the materialism and world was going to change my life and make me happy, joyous, and free, not some kind of spiritual mathematics. Call me crazy, but I think I could be a little bit more happier if I had a few $100s in my pocket. Call me crazy, but it made sense to me. Or if I had a better looking, if I had a job, a legal driver's license, and a car that wasn't held together by any bumper stickers, for God's sake, and a better looking girl or a girl at all, I think I could be a little bit more happy, joyous, and free. Call me crazy. But that's what the self-reliance, and what does our book say? Self-reliance was as good as far as it went, but it usually didn't go very far. But that's all I had. That's what everything hinged on that. And so when Bill's talking about these dependencies, this world reliance, this world that we live in, this very individualistic world that tells us we're not enough every single day. Just turn on any commercial, watch any billboard. You're not enough. You need more. You need more. You need more. You need more. Keeping up with the Joneses, all the little cliches that we've said over the years to try to be who we're supposed to be. And that had its teeth in me big time. It just did. And that my whole dependence was not on any higher power. It was, I guess you wouldn't say, since it was in the meetings and you people, that was what I believed in as far as staying sober. But my dependence for being happy, joyous, and free in my life amounting to something, to have some real value and to turn out all right, wasn't grounded in spiritual or emotional or mental growth. It was all about materialism, individualism. It's what consumed my life. And so there was a huge shift, and we find the equation on page 64. I call it spiritual mathematics, but it says when we put the spiritual ahead of the material, we straighten out mentally, we straighten out physically. You could add emotionally and go on down the line. We start to straighten out. And so, my sponsor, Tom, and Roy definitely can pick up on this as well. But, when it came to things like this, talking about subjects, big subjects like this emotional sobriety or whatever, if you ever listen to Tom do a workshop on any of that stuff, he would be hesitant about talking about all of it. He would say, everything that we need to live an amazing life, we find right here in the 12 steps. And when we try to digress from that and think that there's another fear or another dimension out there that we have to tap into to really be happy, joyous, and free, we kind of lose the basis of what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. And so that was always helpful for me. And then the forward of the 12 and 12, and this is, Tom pointed me to this early on in sobriety, but Tom pointed me to this statement, and I have to keep it this simple for me in so many ways to hang on to this truth about the 12 steps, what the 12 steps are really about. And then the forward to the 12 steps, when you get into the forward of it, the third full paragraph, it says this about the steps. Most of you probably know it, but I'm going to read it because I think it's relative to what we're talking about. And it says, AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happy and usefully whole. And that's a pretty big shift, friends, from where I was at. That was an amazing shift for me to have that journey into the steps. And so I was hesitant because I just didn't believe the 12 steps would change my life. But I was at the point of no return. I come to the end of myself. And so my life depended on it. And I have really net in my walk in AA, and I've sponsored lots of guys and lots of really broken guys. I have never seen anybody live into this thing till their life depended on it. I mean, really live into it. And my life finally depended on it. So I was willing to take actions, as Clancy would say, the old Clancy, God rest his soul, that the hardest thing any of us ever do in Alcoholics Anonymous is take steps that we don't believe in. And I just didn't believe the steps would change my life, but I was at a desperation point that I was willing to give it a shot. And I started that journey, and it tasted so good. I've never stopped from that day till now. It totally transformed my life. It totally did. And we started this journey and the emotional piece of this and growing up spiritually. And I think another phrase you could say that's synonymous that I would use with emotional sobriety would be spiritual maturity. And if you use the term spiritual maturity and put it on a scale of 0 to 100, I was probably a negative number. I wasn't even on the chart when I got here, man. I was an emotional dwarf when I got here. And I know that I'm never going to be 100%. But if I live to life expectancy and I continue on this journey with you people, trudging the road of happy destiny, maybe I get out of 70 or 80. But from where I came from, that's a major, major shift. And God gets all the glory for that. So there's progress, not perfection. And so I think it's really important to know that I'm right with God. It tells me that in the third step prayer promises, that if you stick close to God and perform his work will, here's what's going to happen to you. And then it ends that paragraph with, we were reborn. And so I know I'm right with God. I know I'm right with God the moment I asked God into my life in that prison cell. I know it without a shadow of doubt. I didn't wake up to it for a number of years, but I know it today in my heart that I was right with God that moment. There was nothing else I was ever going to do to get myself any more right with God than that. But as far as spiritual maturity and growing up, yeah, that was a whole process for me. It was a huge process for me. My sponsor, Tom, has a great quote. And Tom says this, and I don't know where he got it from. If it's just his, it just comes from his own wisdom and journey here. Or excuse me, if he got it for somebody else. But Tom says this all the time. When preparation meets opportunity and God does the introductions, amazing things are going to happen in your life. And the reality was early on in sobriety, I wasn't spiritually mature enough. I wasn't emotionally sober enough to receive the blessings that were coming my way. They just passed me by. I wasn't prepared for them. But as I started to work the steps, the spiritual mathematics kicked in. And the beautiful part about that is 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 anymore. The impossible becomes possible. The walls come down and the opportunities come. And now guess what? You're starting to be a little bit more responsible. I think that's a big part of this whole thing is the word responsible. I think Churchill said it best, that the greatest feeling in the world is when you've been responsible. And so I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds good. And I could go with it, at least a little bit. But you know what I'm saying? So you live into this responsibility and things start to happen. And that's what happened in my life. The walls come down and 2 + 2 didn't equal 4 anymore. And I got opportunities to do things that blew my mind, and they still blow my mind today. And I got invited to get into the insurance industry, the financial service industry, because of my mom. And I just want to predicate that my mom finally later in life got involved in that and had a huge career in that, success. And she was very well respected at a major international company. And she said, after I started working the steps, and this is 3 years into it, she invited me to, she said, she brought me over one day. I've always been in construction and hustling my whole life. And she said, what do you think about coming and working for me? I said, are you kidding? I said, they ain't going to hire me at your place. I can't even qualify to take out the trash. I don't even have a GED. I got a criminal record, for God's sake. They're not going to hire me. She says, why don't you let me worry about that? If they'll let you, will you do it? I said, yeah. if they'll let me, I'll do it. Cause I had no faith in that. And I went to this first interview, and the lady said, well, I'm going to send you up to the main guy. His name was Art. And he was the vice president of this major corporation. I went there. I had to borrow a tie from the guy next door to go on this interview. I didn't have a tie. And it was like one of those wimpy from Popeye ties. It only came down about halfway. You know, it didn't even go all the way down. I looked like a pathetic wreck. But and Art made fun of that for years. But I went there. And Art, I'll never forget, he says, I would never hire you. I would never hire you for anything. But I am going to hire you because of your mom. I just want you to know it's just because you're a mom. I have a great respect for your mother. But there's 3 things you're going to do if you work here. You're going to work hard, you're going to work smart, you're going to work honest. And if you don't do any of those 3, you will not work here. Are we clear? I said, yes, sir. So I took that wisdom and adopted it and applied it, and it became wisdom, I should say. And it made a huge difference in my life. So they went to bat for me, and they got the state of Missouri to let me sit and take an exam that I didn't qualify to take. And I didn't pass it the first time, but eventually I passed it, and I lived into it, and I worked hard, and I worked smart, and I worked honest. And they offered me a full-time position there, and I lived into it. And I started to get some initials behind my name, and my life started to take off. And then eventually I hit a roadblock, and I'm double-digit sobriety by this time. And they said, well, you can't go any further because you don't even have a GED, Harold. I mean, you don't even qualify to work here now. And you've been here for 12, 13 years. You don't even qualify to work here. They said, you're going to have to get a GED, man. And I said, well, man, I'm telling my sponsors, I said, I tried that when I was locked up, man. I quit school when I was 13. I can't pass a GED. He said, well, you can pass it. I said, I'm telling you, I've already tried it a few times. And he says, then go back to school. I said, go back to what school? He said, just go back to community college and sit for the GED. I said, are you kidding me? I said, I'm like, doing well in life. He says, no, you need to go do it. And so he convinced me to do it. And I signed up for GED classes. And I walked into the class straight from work, and I had on a tie and a shirt, and they thought I was the instructor when I walked in. It was like, and I said, no, I'm not the instructor. I didn't even look at him. I sat in the front row because they were all just 15, 16, 17-year-old crazy people. When I was a kid, I took the thumbtack out of my KISS poster and pierced my ear. That was a big deal back then. You had to walk around with long hair and an earring. Now they had tattoos everywhere. They had body piercings everywhere. They looked like they fell down the nut and bolt section at Lowe's. I mean, they were crazy looking. I couldn't look at any of them. So I just sat in the front and minding my own business. And this kid named Robbie was sitting next to me, and Robbie had a big mohawk and shaved head, and his mohawk's 100 different colors, and leather jacket and chains and piercings and tattoos. And he looked like he belonged in a museum. He was just a mosaic, a piece of art. And you couldn't help but stare at him. And he caught me staring at him. And this is before the teacher ever walked in. And he said, what are you looking at, old man? That's what he said to me, my first GED class. And I was quick on my feet by that time. I said, well, Robbie, I made love to a parrot one time, and I'm wondering if you might be one of my kids. That's what I'm looking at. And of course, he started laughing. Everybody started laughing. And he was one of my best buddies before a GED class got over. But I went 16 weeks, and I passed the GED. And I went on to college, and I was able to walk across the stage and get a bachelor's degree and send my mom a bumper sticker that said, hey, your kid made the honor roll when I was about 30-something years old, so it was a big joke. But eventually I walked across stage and got a master's degree, and I did my MBA, and I wrote a thesis on starting a business from scratch and selling it. And I've been able to do that not once, but twice in my recovery. And eventually I was able to walk across the stage and get another master's degree. And it's because I started to spiritually mature and grow up. And the more I matured, the more the opportunities came my way. And the more the opportunities came my way, the more I lived into them, and the better my life got. But it's still, very much a challenge. It's this spiritual maturity is based on so many things. I love what it says on page 123 about the alcoholic. It in the 12 and 12 on 123. I just want to jump over to that because I love what it says about the condition of the alcoholic. This is them, and this is. I mean, you couldn't have written a better piece about me than right here on page 123. What it says about us, and this whole page. But it says how we alcoholics did resent the verdict. We would not believe that our adult dreams were often truly childish. And in considering the rough deal life had given us, we felt perfectly natural that we were sensitive. So that was me all the way. I was, I had dealt a tough hand in life, and I was pretty much the victim for a long time. As to our grandiose behavior, we insisted, it says, given us, we felt As to our grandiose behavior, we insisted that we had been possessed of nothing but a high legitimate ambition to win the battle of life. And it goes on to tell us, that we were just simply, and in the top paragraph, it says the distinguished men had the nerve to say that most of the alcoholics under investigation were still childish, emotionally sensitive, and grandiose. Well, man, you couldn't have described me any better than that. When I had 1 year of sobriety and I was on step none, so, that should really tell you where I was at in sobriety. I was on step none. And, I was waiting for somebody to throw a big party for me. And they said, and then I kept waiting for it. Nobody was offering up. So I ended up throwing my own sobriety bash. I called it Harold's Sobriety Bash. True story. And I made 1,000 flyers and I took them down to our central AA office and it said Harold's Sobriety Bash. And the office manager's name was Tom. And when I came in and I showed him, I brought a stack of 1,000 flyers, plop, right on his desk. I said, get these out. And his glasses came down on his nose and he started laughing. And I said, what's so funny? He said, you really want to know what's so funny? I said, yeah. He said, this is the most grandiose thing I've ever seen in my life. And I've been in AA for a long time. I've never seen anything more grandiose than this in my life. And I said, what's wrong with it? He says, it's got your name on it, for goodness sake. I said, all right, I'll take my name off it. But we still had the party. We called it the Sobriety Bash, and I had like 3 bands. My band was one of them. But so, yeah, grandiose, and I'm childish. And I was a mess. I was an emotional misfit in my life. And I had a lot of junk. I had a lot of baggage in my life. I love what some of you might remember Father Martin. Father Martin was awesome. Some of you around, and he did a great series called Chalk Talk, and he wrote it off a series of lectures that he learned and studied under from a gentleman named Dr. Walter Green. And Walter Green talked about the emotional, the E over I, the emotion versus intellect when it comes to alcoholic. And I don't think there's a better description of it. And he basically gives the equation that when we get here, we alcoholics operate off this equation, E over I, emotion over intellect. And hopefully through this 12-step process, that there's a shift that, over time, that we eventually intellect starts to override our emotions. And I would hope to think that I've had a little bit of that in the course of 34 years of coming here. But it's really, really the truth when you think about it, because I was an emotional dwarf. If I thought it, I just did it. If I thought it, I said it. If I reacted to it, there was no intellect that went into it. If I felt it, I just reacted to it in life. And it caused me all kinds of problems in my life, big time problems. There was no thinking that really went into anything. But as I stayed here and started to grow, what I discovered, and Bob, being my friend Bob, and a friend of a lot of ours there from Minnesota, says this all the time. He said, it's not about addition, but it's about subtraction. So you got to remove stuff in your life to grow up here. It's not about adding more things to it. You got to subtract. And I call it tube theology, but I mean, it's our tube spirituality, but this is my tube. This is my contact with you. This is my contact with God. And unfortunately, my tube was completely, you can just picture this tube being filled with rocks and dirt and mud and slush. This is my life when I got here. And I had no connection to any power. I didn't hear any power. When you guys would talk about this power greater than ourselves in the meetings, God sounded like this to me. When you pray, God really spoke to me. I got a nudge from God. The Spirit was really in the room today. I just didn't have that experience until I was able to take the lid off that tube in our 4th and 5th step. And when I was able to finally start dumping out some of those resentments and dumping out those secrets, and boy, Lord knows I had the secrets, especially in the sex conduct and crimes that I committed that I'd never been caught for. When I started to dump that stuff out for the first time and share my entire life story with another human being, guess what? My tube started to get unclogged. And I started to have a whole new connection with this power that we're talking about. And it wasn't just an intellectual thing. But I had to overcome the delusions. I call them the 5 big delusions. But I had these huge 5 big delusions that I had to overcome, even to get to a place where we could even start talking about emotional sobriety. Delusion number 1 is I'm not alcoholic. And that kills most of us. I'm not what you say that I am. Delusion number 2, I am alcoholic, but guess what? It's not my fault. The victim card, victimization, had me by the throat, just like our inventory says. To conclude that others was wrong was about as far as most of us ever get. God, that was definitely me. And the problem with victimization is we can drink ourselves to death and it's not our fault. You can sit in a 9x7 or 10x6 jail cell for the rest of your life. And guess what? It's not your fault. Man, that had me by the throat. And then that next delusion was the delusion of time. Time has passed me by. I broke too many hearts. I burnt too many bridges. It's too late for a guy like me. I'm never going to be able to reconcile and restore my life to anything. And so the discouragement's already in my heart. So why even try? I mean, that's a powerful delusion. None of these things are true, but in my world, they were very, very true. And delusion number 4 was I was spiritually disqualified because of how I lived my life and the choices I made and the twisted theology that was embedded in me from as a child and growing up in the streets and the different things I heard, all these twisted perceptions of God spiritually disqualified me. There's no way I'm ever going to be right with God. There's no way I'm ever going to go on this journey or enter this personal relationship you keep talking about here. It's just never going to happen for a guy like me. And it wasn't until, like I said, I got rid of the secrets and I got rid of all that stuff that I started to have a shift and that delusion started to fade in my life. But it was real, man. I'm telling you, it was real. And then delusion number 5, the last one, was that there was no real purpose for my life. There's no real value for it, man. I lived my whole life and I did all this stuff. We're going to do all these stuff, do all this work and do all this stuff for what? At the end of the day, what value is there really to any of it? What value is there? And I just read what the foreword would say about the 12 steps is that, it leads to a life where you're happy and usefully whole. And I would say it's much more than that for me. It's been an amazing journey for me in this life. And thinking about, that on a higher level, in the spiritual realm of where we're at today, what I've discovered in my 34 years and where I'm at today in my theology and what I would believe is that God's got a purpose. It's his purpose. It's her purpose, however you want to frame it, but it's God's eternal purpose. And it's not until I get my will in line with that I'm ever going to have this real content and this happiness and this joy and this real sense of joy in my life until I get my will in line with his. Bill would say that himself. It's only when we put our will in line with God's that we ever begin to use it rightly. But my extreme self-centeredness runs so deep that I still want God to bend my way. I still want God's blessings to be on my terms. I still want what I want when I want it. And it's not how God, at least how I understand God, doesn't work that way. God has a purpose. And when I put my will in line with it and get into the stream of that, it's a pretty amazing deal. And when I don't, I'm in constant friction and I'm in constant disruption, as Bill was lifting out here. I'm conflict with myself and I'm in conflict with you. I'm in conflict with the world. But if I put my life into that stream and get this equation right and get the intellect over the emotions instead of the other way around, my life starts to shift and it gets on a new flavor. And I love what the 3rd step prayer promises. You're going to begin, again, slowly but surely, you're going to become less and less interested in your little plans and designs and schemes. You're going to be more and more interested in what you contribute to life. And friends, it's that shift, I think, that changes our life. It truly, truly does. I can remember being in the car with my sponsor, Tom, one day. And Tom was not a great driver. I mean, I was usually on high alert when I was riding with Tom, especially in his later years. And he'd have that speaker on. And this guy called one of the guys he sponsored, and he sounds like an auctioneer. He's just rattling off his problems, just 100 miles per hour. He couldn't even get a words in edgewise. Tom's just looking at me laughing, and we're just kind of smiling, and we're just waiting for the moment. And finally, the guy slows down enough so Tom could get something in. This is what Tom said to him. He said, "Are you listening?" He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're working on the wrong patient." And the guy said, "What?" He says, "You're working on the wrong patient." Because the guy was trying to fix himself. And Lord knows how many times I've got caught in that trap, trying to fix me or change you. And as a wise man in St. Louis told me a long time ago, Harold, nothing will mess you up quicker than trying to change somebody. And man, I learned that the hard way too many times. But this journey today, and the way I believe it, in the way I continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness, as Step 10 would tell us, is that I got to put my will in line with God's, and his purpose has to become my purpose. And when I do that, it changes everything. And the way I understand God today is, really there's 3 parts to a human being. There's the soul, there's the spirit, and there's the body. And the soul is made up of the mind, the emotions, and the will. And my spiritual maturity is just not letting the emotions get ahead of, my thoughts, because sometimes I have some dark and twisted thoughts, but not letting my emotions get attached to that. Because if it gets attached to that and the will gets a hold of it, I'm going to do it. It's like jumping off a cliff. It's like if I sit and romance about watching pornography or having something outside the will, I romance that long enough, eventually I'm going to act on it, especially once the emotions get to it. And once the emotions kick in, it's like jumping off a cliff. I'm already gone by that time. So there has to be this shift. That's why I love the little breaks that AA gives us: pause when agitated, you know, refrain from tongue and pen and keyboard and tabs and all the stuff we got today, the send button, refrain from all that stuff. Let your emotions chill out, calm down. All those things in the stream of life that we're given today to be able to live a better life. And so this soul that makes us up, what I believe, our mind, our emotions, and our will. And I love what C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite theologians, would say: you don't have a soul, you are a soul. And I've always loved that. And there's another great question that I put on my nightly review. That the question is this: how is your soul? And it's a great inventory question at night, because it really encompasses all the things that we're talking about in our life today. And so this journey that we've been on in life has changed. And I want to close out with this. These are the two things that have changed my life more than anything else that we're talking about. And that came from Roy. And it was when I asked him to be my sponsor, and we started this journey on the steps. And this is what he said: Harold, there's two things I want you to do for the rest of your life. And if you do these two things well, you're going to have a pretty incredible life. Number one, you always make sure you got a new guy. You always make sure you got a new guy you're walking this journey with. And if you don't have a new guy, you stop what you're doing and you get out your rods, you get out your reels, you get out your bait, and you go fish where there's fish. And you live in an urban area like I do, there's fish all over the place. But you always have a new guy. Number two, you got to go somewhere once a week where you don't want to end up. And I don't care where that's at, but you can pick it, but I want you committed to going there. And so that started for me here in St. Louis at the Skid Row Mission Salvation Army Harbor Light, which is still active today. And I went there every Thursday night and Saturday morning for 3 years. Hardest AA I've ever done in my life. But it really shaped me, because it forced me to deal with all the isms that I had in my life. And Lord knows I had a bunch of them. All the phobias that I had in my life, they all were exposed at that place. And I had to work through them. And that's one thing Tom taught me many times: just work it out. Wherever the problem is, work it out there. Don't try to come back over here and work it out. You're going to have to work it out there. You're going to have to work it out in the scheme of life. And it made a huge difference in my life to work through those. I didn't ask for a lot of those isms and those phobias. They were just what I accumulated. It was like a magnet going through a junkyard. I accumulated a lot of crap in my life. But I had to unpack it, and I learned a lot there. I didn't necessarily know it then, because as Bob B would say, life is lived forward and experienced backwards, in reverse. It's kind of how it happens. You look back in hindsight and you can see it for what it is. But I started that journey in 1993. A buddy of mine called and said, "Hey, would you come and speak at this prison?" And I started laughing. I said, "Dude, do you know who you're talking to?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "They're not going to let me come and talk at that prison." He goes, "I think you've been off paper long enough. I can get you in there." And I said, "Well, man, let me just tell it to you like this. I made a pact a long time ago. I ain't never going behind a fence or bars for you or anybody else in my life ever again. So no thanks." And he started laughing. He goes, "Well, why don't you run that by your sponsor and call me back?" Well, you know how that went. He said, "No, you're going to go." He actually went with me. And that started my journey in the Department of Corrections, and I've been there ever since. So that's how I got connected with Tom ultimately. But I've been involved in corrections ever since. And right now we're out because of COVID, but when we're back active, I'll be in there every week. And it's been an amazing journey for me. And I could sit here and tell stories till the weekend's over about the experiences I've had from that. But I want to close out with this. And I think it's really, really important. So all this spiritual maturity, all this emotional sobriety, all this stuff gets worked out through life. You just have to go through life, and you just have to experience it. And that's why we need the sponsors in our life more than ever, because we need somebody who's not emotionally involved in our deal. We need people that aren't financially or emotionally invested in what's going on in our life to help us see it for what it is, because we still have this propensity to want to see things in a very twisted perspective, a very self-centered, individualistic, consumeristic mindset that we live in. And when my emotions are attached to it, I can promise you I don't see it for what it is. If I can sit here all day and tell you, "Hey, I'm a great husband," but if I really want to know if I'm a great husband, I probably ought to go ask Susie, who I'm married to. She'll tell me real quick, if I'm a great husband, right? Or I go ask my sponsor or some people in my inner circle, but don't ask me, because I always judge myself by my intentions and everybody else by their actions. That's just the plight of the human being. But we need people in our life, in our inner circle, things like this, to be able to see ourselves for what we really are. But it says this, and I'll close with this. On page 152, it says this: "Do you have a sufficient substitute for king alcohol?" And it says, yes, it's vastly, and it's vastly more than that. It's a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the word fellowship there is used in a verb form, not a noun. So it means we're going to have to participate in our own sobriety. You know, as the old saying goes, God will move mountains for you, but he's going to ask you to bring a shovel. Well, that's what they're talking about. You're going to have to you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and get into the game. But if you do this thing, if you sincerely come all, as my buddy Gary would say, you come all the way in, sit all the way down and stay, the most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead of you. And you're going to have amazing lifelong friends. And I got some of those right on this call tonight. And your imagination is going to be fired. And you're going to meet some incredible people. And you're going to walk this journey with a lot of amazing broken people. Where are you to find these people? Rich and poor, all over the place. If you live in an urban area, they're everywhere. I mean, I could easily go out and find people right now. But the beauty of it is, I love how it encapsulates this on the top of page 153. And it's really, I think, brings it all home to how we grow spiritually and where we're at. And it basically says this: you're going to have the privilege, and I'm paraphrasing at this point, but you're going to have the privilege to walk shoulder to shoulder with other people and help them rediscover life. And friends, that's one of the most powerful promises you'll ever do in your life. And it says when you do that long enough, you're eventually going to know what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. As Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? He said, well, he gave a double commandment: love God and love your neighbor. So when we say our code here in Alcoholics Anonymous is love and service, that's what it's about. We just need to live into that in every aspect of our life. We just need to love and serve, and we live by that and do it to the best of our ability. It's going to be an amazing life. And you're going to grow up spiritually, and you're going to grow up emotionally. And some days are going to be better than others. Some days just flat suck. But alcoholics are like tea bags. You don't know what they're made out of until you put them in hot water. And this last year has put a lot of people in hot water, friends. So yeah, obviously you're made out of something pretty special because you're still here. My life has been jacked. I've done funerals for a couple of great long-term AA members in recovery. It hasn't been a fun year for me in the external sensitive thing, but as far as emotionally and not getting sucked into all that stuff and totally trusting that God's going to have the final say, I'm totally into that. And that's where my life's been. And it's been a great ride, and it still is today. So friends, that's all I got tonight. Glenn, Sam, I really appreciate you coming in. I'm excited for you and all the cool things you had go on this year in your life. It was fun to watch that, through social media a little bit and see some of the joys in your life and some of the blessings of sticking around here and doing this thing. And I'm excited to hear from some of my friends here tonight. And that's all I got. Thank you for letting me share.
Thanks, Harold.
Thank you, Harold.
Love
Thank
that.
you,
Hey,
Harold. Awesome.
kind of the way that we do this
Thanks,
is you
Harold.
look on the screen and call on a couple people, and then we'll open it up. Will you hear me, Harold?
Mm-hmm. You want me to call a couple people?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll start with my old good friend, Roy.
Roy H.
That's one of my sponsorship buddies.
I'm Roy Hooser. I'm a grateful alcoholic. Way to go, little brother. I appreciate what you had to say, Harold. And man, anytime you mention Tom, it strikes my heart. I miss him. God, I miss him, and I know you do. This man changed me from what I was to what I'm capable of becoming. But you did a good job, and I enjoyed everything you had to say. And I didn't think you had it in you, little brother. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Want to pick somebody else? All right, let's. I'm going to grab somebody I don't know. How about Don from Richmond?
That's a good one. All right, Don.
I'm alcoholic.
Don.
Well, I'll share. Always like every week, me. How's this happening? But I will tell you that this is the group where my heart is. So it keeps me current and present. And thank you so much for your share. It was like a journey. Woo! We're just sitting here listening up and down the roller coaster of alcoholism and recovery. I was listening to what you were saying about the soul, and that it's very promising to me that that's the truth about me, that I'm a soul, because currently my the externals aren't doing what I always kind of want them to do. And it's very comforting to know that there's more going on here than money, property, prestige, and me trying to live life as I would have it versus as, you know, like the bigger picture. There's something bigger going on than just me and what I want. And you know, for an alcoholic who you know runs the gamut on any given day of depression, anxiety, self-pity, all these kind of things, you know, that there has to be something of a little more depth and weight than, you know, what's going on in my household. So that's a thing that's really nice to be reminded of. And I've been this meeting kind of has a way of like chauffeuring me to the next thing that needs to happen. It's like I make it from week to week, you know, like I'm going to get to emotional sobriety. And I remember early recovery being that way, you know, when I was just trying to make it to this thing. And that's kind of way this meeting has become for me is a marker to, wow, I made it again. And so that's been wonderful to come through here. The thing that's been present for me, and I'm not good at it. I'm in the process of developing a personal experience and language for the word discernment. And when you talked about, you know, when the soul is actually informing the day, that I actually have hope to be able to make some reasonable progress in my life. I'd like to say decisions, but without a lot of help. I don't make good decisions. I make decisions that are pretty alcoholic, honestly. I mean, I believe that I am, you know, of the type that that Tom talks about. I need it all. I need everything that recovery has to offer. I also want it all, but more than that, I think over the past month, I realized that I also need it all, and I still need everything just as intently as I needed it, you know, the day I got out of treatment or the day I walked in there. And I thank everyone that comes to this meeting regularly, because for me, it has become a nice, soft landing spot every week. It is very reassuring to me. And I like that when you said, you know, fellowship as a verb, because I have to participate and I have to show up and I have to, I mean, I ain't feeling too good this week. So I literally wanted to turn my camera off and like fade into the woodwork. But that's not fellowship with a verb. That's fellowship with me taking. And so thanks for calling on me, and I'll see y'all next week.
Love it. Thanks, Don. And we'll open it up. And anybody who would like to share, raise their hand. And we'll see if we can get Jessica P. Mike, can you get Jessica to share tonight? Yeah, put her on over there. We'll go ahead and pick on her while we're waiting on somebody to raise their hand.
Thank you, Sam.
No problem.
Goodness, thank you.
She said, no, don't make me share.
I'm Jessica, alcoholic.
Jessica.
This was such a good meeting. Sorry, I was like, I have to be honest, I'm like pregnant and falling asleep here. But yeah, I just love hearing the miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I can't get enough of those stories. And Harold, you have one of those stories that are just so touching, you know, like it's a really unique story. We all have unique stories, but to hear what God's done in your life and what God's done with you and like how the capacity at which you can serve today that you didn't even know that you wanted, you know, that's God. Like, it's just like above and beyond what we can do on our own strength. And that's what, I mean, I had no idea that I wanted to serve people or the world or do anything with myself, much less even thought that I was worth anything. But yet, like, the grandiosity, like you shared, is so true. It was like I was all puffed up, going around telling everyone, what they're going to do. And I remember I was on a Holland America cruise line. My brother was the entertainment director there. And I was just like, of course, drinking. And I was invited down to the crew, the part of the boat. And my brother tells this story all the time. He's like, do you remember how you just spent the night telling my whole staff what they needed to do with their life while you're slurring your words and falling over? Like, that was me. Like, that was my best self. And that's not who I am today. Like, I'm not even that person. Like, I see people today that knew me back then, and they just cannot believe, they literally cannot believe how different I am and how I have changed from the inside out in a way that they can't even put their finger on. And I mean, I work in the church a lot, and Christians will go, yeah, well, that's God, and God blessed you, and all of that is true, but I know deep down that without Alcoholics Anonymous, there's no way I could have had the transformation that I did. No amount of prayer would have done it for me. No amount of self-help or like volunteer work would have done it for me. And I didn't even know, like you described so perfectly, I didn't even know that the 12 steps were going to do that. And I just did what I was told, and then I changed. And then I walked a different woman on totally different footing in the world. And that's how I live today. And that's how I share with my girls. And I try to really, help them understand the woman I used to be, because they just can't relate to me today if I don't do that. And like the book says, that's the most precious gift I have today, is to be able to relate to the people that haven't had that transformation yet enough, so that they can be inspired, so that can happen for them too, because we have this thing and it's transferable and it can happen for anyone, but it doesn't. It's like we say, it's for those who want it, not those who need it. I've lost a lot of people, including my brother and my dad, to this disease. And it's frightening, but it's also, on the other side of things is it's very beautiful too. And isn't that God's world? Like, he doesn't just give you bad or good, he gives you everything. And that's the world I get to live in today. So thanks for your share, and thanks for calling me, Sam.
Thank you so much for sharing. Again, raise your hand if you'd like to share. Hey, Harold, while we still have you, I'd really love to hear, can you talk a little bit about just when you kind of reunited with some of your family? I love that story. Some of the members of your family that you reunited with. I think while I have you here, I might as well pull that out of you.
Yeah, well, and actually my Aunt Betty's 80 years, my Aunt Betty's birthday was today. But, when I started doing my A-step list, my sponsor had me put it on 3x5 index cards. And the reason why is he wanted me to put a big fat rubber band around them and keep them on my desk where I saw them every day, so they would pull on me like magnets. And so as we started to unpack this 8-step list, I had a lot of people that he wanted on my list that I just never participated in their life, but I never really directly did anything to them other than I just wasn't a part of their life, which this, listen to that, how that sounds. But I mean, that to me, that sounded, justifiably okay. I didn't really owe them nothing just because I didn't participate. But and so he started. My dad's brother was one of them. He said, how about your uncle? Do you have any uncles? I said, well, my dad's got a brother, Uncle Bob, who's still alive. I think he's still alive. I haven't seen him since I was like 5 or 6. He says, well, why don't you need to put him on your list. And I said, why? I said, I never did anything to him. He said, you ever call him? I said, no, I never called him. Did you ever send him I said, no, I never did any of those things. He goes, well, then, you're a part of the family and you choose not to be a part of it. And maybe I think you ought to put that down. And I said, well, I'll put it down. But I said, he's an adult. I'm the kid. If he really wanted to reach out to me or do something, he would have done it. So this is that twisted perception. And this is the delusion in their life. Cost me so much. I wouldn't even want to know how much it cost me in my life. And so I put him down. But I mean, every time he'd come up, he went right to the back. And this went on for years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 12 years. I'm 12 years sober and I only got a few cards left. Uncle Bob's one of them, and probably one of the simplest ones to ever do, but I didn't feel like I owed the guy anything. And finally I was in the prison one night. We were doing a workshop and we were right on steps 8 and 9 in the workshop. And I was talking about where I was at on my A-step list. And one of the offenders just called me out and he says, dude, when are you just going to do it and shut up? And I had no comeback. I'm like, well, yeah, you kind of got me. And so I said, all right. And so I went home and I prayed and I got on the internet and I Googled Robert and Betty Long, and poof, Buffalo, Missouri popped up. I said, well, that's got to be mine. Wow, I mean, that's got to be. And how many Uncle Robs and Roberts and Betty Longs are there? And so I wrote a Christmas card. I got their address and sent them a Christmas card with a brief summary of my life, and licked a stamp. You licked stamps back then, and threw it in the mail. And he called, and my Aunt Betty called me like a few days later. Well, they sent me a card first. I got the card, and they were just ecstatic to hear from me. And then she called me to make sure I got the card. And I said, yeah, I got it. And we had a conversation. I said, and I talked to her about, now I needed to reconcile with them. I needed to, make this amends in person if it was possible. And they said, well, we'd love to see you, son. That's what they called me. Little Harold, or son. And they said, we'd love to see you, but all this amends stuff, we're not really worried about that. We just love to see you. And I said, well, let's set it up. So we set it up. And I got in the car and set it up for a Thursday afternoon. I drove from St. Louis to Buffalo, Missouri. It's about 3.5 hour drive. And then there's a great promise in the big book, and we missed it a lot of times. It says 9 times out of 10, the unexpected is going to happen. Well, that's really been my story when it comes to these amends. And so I drove to Buffalo, and I'd done enough amends to know it's going to be okay. I mean, there's nothing tragic going to happen out of this, but I'm still a nervous wreck going there. And I pull on Locust Street, which is a little town of about 3,300 people in Buffalo, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I pull down the street, and there's a little single-story ranch. It's got a double driveway, and there's 3 cars already in, and there's one spot for me. And I pull in it, and I look out on the streets, and there's cars going both directions parked on the street. I thought, dang, these people got a lot of cars, man. I mean, around here. And I got out. My Aunt Betty comes out on the front porch, and she smiles at me. And she's a little country lady, and she smiles at me. She got the screen door open, so she's communicating back into the room. And she looks at me, from the driveway, and she hollers back in the house, well, he looks like a long. So I knew I had the right house, and my heart's ready to pound out on my chest. And I walk up to the house, and my Uncle Bob comes out on the front porch. And I take it, I haven't seen these people, in 30 years probably. And my Uncle Bob comes out on the front porch, and he sticks his hand out. I'll never forget it. He gave me the firmest handshake probably a man's ever given me. And his exact words to me, I'll never forget it, said, welcome home, son. I want you to come inside. I got some people I want you to meet. And I went inside his house, and every one of his kids, every one of his grandkids, and several of our cousins, there was probably over 30 people there who welcomed me back in their life as I stood there. And I was just humbled. And my heart was just, I was really feeling 2 different things at once. I was just full of grace, how awesome, our process is here, but also how victim of this extreme self-centeredness, and how it still costed me well into my sobriety. And this relationship was there for the taking from day one. But I avoided because of my emotional dwarfism, if you want to call it that, and my rebellious, narcissistic attitude about life. And it cost me, but it's been a great relationship. And Uncle Bob died a few years ago, but the family's reconciled. It's like we've never been apart, and I see them a lot. And it's a great house. So it's a great story. And so thanks, Sam, for letting me share it. Thank you.
Thank you. So what about you, Mary Thayer?
Hi there. Harold, I haven't heard you before, and it was an honor and a privilege to hear you tonight. I love your story. I love to hear how, what it reminded me of is something that my sponsor's husband used to say, said, we alcoholics do everything backwards. He said, we know everything about how to die, how to be angry, how to, just be filled with pain and everything. We know nothing about living in life and love and enjoy. And he said, I sobered up in California, and they used to give birthday cakes. And he said, just watch people light candles on the birthday cakes. They always light the outside and then burn themselves trying to light the inside. And so we do everything backwards. We just are kind of outright mental defectives, and we run into ourselves. So I liked how you said how did you say we run to the end of ourselves?
We have to come to the end of ourselves.
Yeah. And I've always felt as though I run into myself. So that's running into the end of myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciated your story. I appreciated the realities and the bringing out of how our big book really just allows us, if we follow the black lines, to come to a place where we start to respond to life versus react to it from emotion. One of the biggest things that I've learned was the pausing, as you talked about. And it took a long time for me to just continue to pause when agitated or doubtful. And then to just have the restraint enough of tongue and pen that I finally understood as time went on, and I did 12 steps after 12 steps after 12 steps, that that place of neutrality that is promised in that 10th step is where I feel safe and protected. And it's in the world of the spirit. It is where all of a sudden I've contacted something deep down inside of myself that makes me feel as though whatever I have to go through, and it's not like we haven't gone through enough with trials and low spots, but there has been a lot in the external that I've looked to or tried to get attached to for safety. And as life has gone on for me, I've found that the external connection or attachment it's childish. It was really childish. And how I looked to people to be there for me. And it was really on reasonable demands upon a loved one. That wasn't their job. That was God's job. And I didn't have any belief in a power until I came into these halls. I remember I didn't have any religion, but I have joined a religion. Let's just put it that way. But I found my God in Alcoholics Anonymous by doing what the black lines have told me to do. And wherever I go to church or whatever I choose to be is a place sometimes just to enhance a feeling of a presence. But I usually have that with me every day. And I too have felt that this pandemic has challenged me each day to learn to reinforce this living a day at a time and to get better connected with that presence. But I so enjoyed hearing you. Your sponsor was one of my favorites. I sponsor a gal whose husband was sponsored by Tom, and I had the privilege of doing a weekend workshop with him up in Chicago just before he kind of got iller and was no longer speaking. But it was on Back to Basics, and a lot of people had never done, well, I shouldn't say never, but it isn't like the everyday thing that when I came in, 12-step calls. And Tom and I talked about how we would go out and what we would do with 12-step calls, and that there wasn't a lot of rehabs and stuff. And I just loved that guy. And I remember I was talking to him over that weekend, and he told me where he was from. And I said, you know, I heard a tape when I went to the first international I went to was in New Orleans. And I picked up a tape, and it was by this guy named Franklin W. I never met him. And Tom just looked at me and he started to laugh because I guess he was in his hometown. He said, you really picked the good ones, Mary. I said, yeah, and you're one of them, Tom. A wonderful man. He gave me a gift. I helped start the Fellowship of the Spirit in Portland, Maine. And so both, you know, Don Pritz and Tom and people came to talk. And I had gotten a little bit upset about big book people becoming divisive. you have to do the big book this way or whatever. I don't know what was going on, but there was a lot going on. And I remember I asked him and I asked Dawn, I said, what's happening with us with the big, why is this becoming so divisive on how you have to do this thing? And they both told me the same thing. And they said, Mary, just keep doing what you're doing and keep loving people the way you do. Because the answer is love. It's the spirit, it's the action, as you so said. Thank you. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Mary. That was beautiful.
Thank you so much for sharing. What about our old buddy Barkley?
Hi, kids. I'm old buddy Barkley, and I'm an alcoholic.
What's up, Barkley?
Barkley.
Harold,
man?
I always get so much out of your talks, man. I really do. And one of the things that you were talking about is doing that daily review, which I got to tell you, I did very, very intermittently before we started kind of working together. And it really, I can see why they suggest doing it in the big book. I really can. Because it really does kind of make you stop and look. And I don't really want to use the word analyze, but take an honest stock of where you are at the end of every day. And there is a clarity to it that I hadn't had before. And I'm really grateful for that. So I'm a satisfied customer of the daily review. And truly, I really appreciate your talk. And I just love you to death. And thank you, Sam, for having this thing. This is an amazing deal. Thanks.
Thank you, man. Thank everybody for coming. I guess we don't have any, do we have any burning desires? Looks like maybe Lee and Jennifer in Santa Fe, they need to share. They don't necessarily think that they wanted to share, but I can see it in their face.
Sam, you are such a sweetheart. Thank you a lot. Jennifer, alcoholic. I just got to say, Harold, you blew me away. That was like an amazing share. I was so glad I got to hear it. And you just you just packed so much into that share. I mean, it was great. And I guess I can relate to it. The emotional sobriety part, I was 37 years old with 3 little kids and throwing the biggest tantrums in the home. And that was in sobriety. And, I really needed help. I just did not know how to manage an adult sized life, but I was 37 with children and a divorce. And it was time to start, being an adult in my life. And it was just I just didn't know. And I think one of the hardest things, has been to keep doing the drill and learning that as I, do the drill, do these steps, and the stuff is cleared out, that there is a power that has helped all along. I've wanted certain things so bad, and like one of them was I was single and I didn't want to be, and I spoke to somebody in the program that I admire, and she said, well, you ask God for the power to be single, and I thought, God, that's brilliant. I'll just ask God for the power to be single. That is such a brilliant thing. And at one point I had a lot of advantages growing up, and I didn't take advantage of any of them. I didn't seem to fit in my family. And so I was way outside my family when my mother needed care. And it all sort of fell together that I ended up taking care of my mother. And I didn't want to take care of my mother. I didn't like my mother. And I just, I was also told that was okay. But, I won't go into the stories, but there's a story where God I was walked through that, and I was able to show up and manage the finances, which I thought, you got to be kidding. Have you met me? Like, I don't do finances and I don't read documents. And, but I was really led through that whole thing where I ended up taking care of my mom and taking care of finances, which I still think was kind of bizarre. But I really, all these people kept showing up in my life you know, and I really began to see there is definitely a power here that is working. And I don't get it. I don't know what it is, but to leave each day seeking that power and then learning to trust that power is showing up, even when things aren't going the way I like, has been the hugest gift. And, but I have to stay very plugged in, you know, for that. So gosh, thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for taking us home. Well, Harold, can you think of anything else you might have thought of while you were waiting that you'd like to share that's Spirit move you on anything further?
Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs. All right. So we'll, the way that we close this up is we just mute ourselves and inwardly go and say the Lord's Prayer inside to ourselves. So we'll do that and then we'll come back. Amen. God bless. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Harold.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harold.
Yes, very
Thank
much.
Yeah, Harold.
Good,
Thank
man.
you.
Thank you, Harold. Great talk.
Thank you. Good to see
Well,
you.
Sam, thanks for making.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Harold.
Thanks, Harold.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Harold.
You betcha.
Thanks, Harold.
Thanks, Harold and Sam.
Sam, we'll see you later, brother. Thank you.
Awesome job, Harold.
Thank you.
Well, sorry about that. Hey, Harold, thanks, man. Much love. Appreciate you.
You too, brother. Keep up the good work.
All
Thanks,
right.
Harold. Appreciate
See you,
it.
man. See you guys.